Hello everyone, welcome back to Technical Potpourri. Today, I'm going to talk about a very powerful feature that is coming to your org right after Spring 26 release, and it's all about how to make your deployment faster. This is especially applicable to those large orgs where running all tests feels like waiting forever, and it's called Deploy Apex Component Faster by running only the relevant test. As of today, this feature is currently in a beta state, but let's break it down and see it in action. So let's discuss what this feature is all about. In Salesforce Spring 26 release, Salesforce introduced a new Apex deployment test level and it's called RunRelevantTests. So this new test level is going to run only those test classes which are relevant to the deployed Apex changes, not like running all the tests from your org. So let's understand why this is so important. As you can see in the screen, we have an existing test level called the run local test. And what it will do, it will basically run all tests, but it is not going to run all the tests from the managed packages. After that, we have run all tests in org. And what it's going to do is going to run every test, including the managed package test. Like any test which are part of the managed package is going to run that as well. And then we have the run specified test, which only runs the test that you pick manually. So as of today, we have three test levels: run local test, run all tests in org, and run specified test. So these are the three levels we have today. So now comes run relevant tests, which is being introduced as part of Spring 26 release. So let's understand what is new about that. So what it's going to do is analyzes your deployment package and code dependencies. That's one thing. Second thing, it automatically determines which test truly matters. If you're deploying some Apex component, it automatically determines which tests are really relevant for the changes that you're planning to deploy. And it eliminates unnecessary test runs. So if there are a lot of test classes in your org and most of the test classes are not relevant to the things that you are planning to deploy, then why to run all tests? Run only the tests which are relevant to the component that are being deployed. So that's where the run relevant test is so important. Finally, it helps you get faster deployment while still maintaining the code quality. This is very important. You are not breaking the code quality because you are definitely running the relevant tests based on what are being deployed. At the same time, you are decreasing the deployment time, and by doing that, you are basically increasing the efficiency of the deployment process. So how it works? So there are four categories of tests that will run when you use the run relevant test. So let's understand that. Number one, tests included in the deployment payload. So in the deployment payload, if you are including any test, it is definitely going to run that. Tests automatically determined by Salesforce dependency analysis. So Salesforce dependency analysis will try to understand all the tests that are relevant to the changes that are being deployed, and it will automatically run that. So that's very important. Second, we have annotation called isTest, and then in that annotation we are going to mention this test is relevant for which Apex component, like test for you. Here you can mention the Apex class, Apex trigger, right? So the tests which are explicitly declared they are for certain Apex component, it is definitely going to run that. And for that, in the test class, you need to annotate with isTest followed by test for and mention all the Apex component. I'm going to show you in a demo very soon. And the fourth one is if you think a test is very critical, then in that annotation, you will write critical equals to true. By doing that, Salesforce will automatically run that test class every time, irrespective of what component is being deployed. So this is very important because critical tests should always run. And the way to make test critical is like critical equals to true in the isTest annotation. So these are the four categories of tests that will run every time when you use a run relevant test level. Okay, now why it's important? Let me explain what happens before the run relevant test and what happens with the run relevant test. Okay, so as you can see in the screen, before run relevant test, if org has large test suite, then deployment becomes slow because it's going to run all the test classes, right? And manual test selection is always error prone because now you are depending on a human, and a human can always make the mistakes. These are the two problems that we always faced before the run relevant test. So let me explain now how this run relevant test is going to solve the problem. Now, after this run relevant test, scale with the size of your change. That's important. Definitely faster deployment. So if you have a CI/CD process with run relevant tests, your deployment will be really faster. Less waiting, because deployment is faster means less waiting and you are getting the feedback quickly. And it's very much better aligned with the test ownership and the code change. So if you follow a test-driven development process, then every code change should be supported by a test. It's better aligned with that concept. Your every code change is owned or is proven by a corresponding test method. So that's very important. So this is where this run relevant test is going to help your deployment process, making it faster at the same time without compromising the code quality. With that, let's understand when to use that. So we should use run relevant test when you are in a beta mode and ready to try the feature. You are doing a POC, right? And you want to try the feature. Your org is really large, and every time you're deploying something in UAT or in prod, is running all the tests and is making the deployment process slow, then you should definitely try these run relevant tests. And definitely, if your deployments are slow, it means you are getting the feedback late. So if you want to get the faster CI/CD feedback, then this is one option. And you are trying to mark some tests which are annotated with critical and test for. So if these are the 4 scenarios, then you definitely should use the run relevant tests. So it helps keep deployment efficient without sacrificing the quality. That's very important. Efficient deployment without sacrificing the code quality. That's where the run relevant test is so important. With that, let me bring my Visual Studio Code and show you some example how you can use that. As you can see in the screen, I have this account trigger, and this account trigger is basically, there is an account handler. From the account handler, I'm calling a class which is account action. There is nothing, no logic here, but the thing that I want to show you here is that account trigger test. This is the test that I have written for this scenario. So now after this Spring 26 release, what you can do when you're writing an Apex test class, you can annotate the test class with isTest, followed by you can type test for and all the Apex component which are relevant for this test class. For example, here I have mentioned this test class is for Apex class account handler and Apex trigger account trigger. So it means every time I'm going to deploy this account handler class or account trigger, this trigger, and if there is any change, Salesforce will automatically run this test class if I mention run relevant test in the command. So let me show you that. So let's go here in the Apex handler and let's make a very small change. So let's type initialization. I'm just putting a comment, and then in the terminal, I'm going to pass this command, which is basically SF project deploy start. Which component I'm going to deploy? I'm going to deploy this account handler. Here is the important thing, run relevant test. I'm putting this one, run relevant test, and the verbose because I want to see the output. So now if I initiate this command, see what will happen. I didn't mention the test class, right? Because of this run relevant test, Salesforce will automatically go and run this two test method. So if you go, these are the two test methods. It's a very blanket one. I'm not basically testing the actual functionality. I'm just showing you the feature of this run relevant test, right? So Salesforce automatically ran this Apex test because Salesforce understand by run relevant test, I'm telling that I'm going to deploy this account handler. So find out what is the relevant test for account handler and run that. So that's what it's done here. One thing which I'm still not able to figure it out is that from this output, I'm not able to understand what is the relevant test. So I was expecting that it will tell me that you are trying to deploy account handler. So corresponding relevant test is account trigger test, and I'm running this two test method. It's not showing me that information. At the same time, when I'm going to the org and go to the deployment window, this is a deployment that happened recently, and if I open that, it's very surprisingly telling that me have done a deployment, but there is no test class ran. So this information is definitely not getting aligned with what I'm seeing from the terminal. One thing that you need to understand, let's say there is no changes this time, right? And I'm going to deploy the same Apex handler again without any changes. If I do that, I'm running the same comment again. If I do that, then see what will happen this time. It's actually trying to deploy the same Apex class account handler, but since there is no changes in that Apex class, the running test is basically skipped. So now Salesforce is intelligent enough that if you're trying to deploy a metadata to an org and there is literally no change, then it will not run any test. So that's very important. With RunRelevantTest, Salesforce will automatically do a kind of diff between what you are trying to do and what is there in the org. And if you see there is only differences, then only it will run the test. Otherwise, it will not run the test. So this is very helpful. Okay, with that, another thing which I want to show you quickly is that instead of this, there is another annotation which you can put here, which is, let me copy this and comment out the first annotation. And here, instead of test for, I can write another parameter, which is critical equals to true. And let's deploy this test class to the org. Now look what will happen. Now, if I deploy this account handler class without making any change, it will still run the test class because this test class I have marked as critical equals to true. So depending on whether there is a change, whether there is no change, whether you are deploying some other metadata, this test class will always run. So let me do that. Let me execute the same comment again. Let me clear the terminal first and now run the same comment again. Now see what will happen. Even though there is no changes in this account handler, but just because I put the RunRelevantTest in the command, it ran this test class because this test class is marked as critical too. So basically, if you want to make a test class critical for your org and you want the test class to run every time, irrespective of there is a change, there are no change, you are deploying some metadata, other metadata, then all you need to do, you need to annotate the test class with each test followed by critical equals to true. That way the test class will always run. But if you don't want that and you want to write a test class specific for a particular Apex metadata, then what you can do, instead of critical equals to true, you need to add the parameter in the each test annotation, test for equals followed by which component, which metadata for which the test class is. For example, here I have written initially, this test class was for account handler Apex class and account trigger Apex trigger. So that's the way you should write and use RunRelevantTest in the deployment to make your deployment faster without compromising the code quality. That wraps up the introduction about Salesforce RunRelevantTest. Let me know in the comment section of this video if you have already used this feature and how much faster your deployment got. And if you think this video is helpful, please hit the like icon and please share this video with your friends, with your colleagues, so they know about this powerful feature. Finally, please subscribe to my channel so that in future when I'll publish videos like this covering different Salesforce topic, Google Cloud, AI, analytics, machine learning, you'll be the first person to be notified. Until next time on Technical Potpourri, keep learning.